What's up, guys? Today we're diving into the dark world of history's most notorious criminals. These aren't your typical bad guys. These are the masterminds who built criminal empires and changed the face of crime forever. From legendary gangsters who ruled cities to brilliant con artists who fooled the world. Get ready for some of the most incredible criminal stories ever told. Chicago, 1920s. The city's ruled by a man they call Scarface, Al Capone. A name that still sends chills down people's spine. This isn't just another gangster story. This is about a man who turned crime into a corporate empire worth $1.3 billion in today's money. Here's the crazy part. Capone started as a bouncer in Brooklyn, working for small-time gangsters. But during Prohibition, when alcohol became illegal, Capone saw his chance. He turned Chicago's illegal booze trade into a money-printing machine. He wasn't just brutal, he was smart. The violence, though, that was something else. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, February 14th, 1929. 7 rival gang members lined up against a wall, executed with machine guns. Capone's signature, move. But he was always at the opera when these things happened. The perfect alibi. But check this out. He wasn't your typical mobster. Capone opened soup kitchens during the Great Depression, feeding thousands daily. He even put expiration dates on milk to protect children. Had politicians and cops on his payroll. Some people saw him as a modern-day Robin Hood. Most fascinating part, the feds couldn't get him for murder, bootlegging, or any violent crimes. The most powerful gangster in America got taken down by tax evasion. Simple paperwork brought down an empire. They sent him to Alcatraz, where syphilis started eating away at his brain. The mighty Al Capone ended up fishing in puddles with an imaginary rod, playing banjo to ghosts only he could see. Think about this. A guy who controlled an entire city, brought down by unsigned tax forms. His legacy, the business model he created, mixing legitimate business, political connections, and brutal force. It's still being copied by criminal organizations today. And speaking of criminal empires, get ready for our next story. Because Pablo Escobar took Capone's blueprint and built something even bigger and more terrifying. Welcome to Colombia in the 1980s, where one man built such a massive drug empire. He was making $60 million every single day. Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, a man so powerful, he offered to pay Colombia's entire national debt just to avoid extradition. Here's what's mind-blowing. At his peak, Escobar controlled 80% of the global cocaine market. He was spending $2,500 monthly just on rubber bands to hold his cash. The planes carrying cash to Panama were so heavy they could barely take off. He lost $2 billion a year just to water damage and rats eating the money. But here's the crazy part. In Colombia, they called him Robin Hood. He built houses for the poor, soccer fields for kids, hospitals for the sick. When he ran for Congress, people loved him. But cross him? That was a death sentence. His famous phrase, plata o plomo, silver or lead, take the bribe or take the bullet. The violence was unreal. He blew up a commercial airplane just to kill one person, put bounties on police, $2,000 for each dead cop. By 1991, Medellin saw 6,349 murders in just 1 year. His prison? He built it himself, called La Catedral, with a soccer field, bar, and jacuzzi. The hunt for Escobar became the largest manhunt in history. US Delta Force, Colombian Army, rival cartels, all wanted him dead. The end came in 1993, shot on a rooftop in Medellin. Some say he shot himself. Others say it was the police. The truth, we may never know. But check this out. At his funeral, thousands of poor people came to mourn him. The man who killed so many was still seen as a hero by those he helped. Makes you wonder, can someone be both a monster and a savior? And speaking of legendary outlaws, get ready for our next story, because Bonnie and Clyde are coming up, and their wild crime spree changed America forever. Meet America's most famous outlaw couple, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. A love story written in bullet holes and empty bank vaults. During the Great Depression, when most Americans were starving, these two became folk heroes, robbing banks and outsmarting the law, all while capturing America's imagination. Here's what's wild. Bonnie was a waitress. Clyde was a small-time crook. But together, they became a media sensation. Papers couldn't get enough of them, especially after police found Bonnie's photos and poetry at their hideout. Young, attractive, and dangerous, they were like Hollywood stars with guns. But don't let the glamour fool you. The Barrow Gang was brutal. Their 2-year crime spree left 13 people dead, mostly police officers. They didn't just rob banks. They shot their way out of traps, broke Clyde out of prison, and lived on the run, stealing cars and staying one step ahead of the law. The most fascinating part? They were terrible at being criminals. Most of their robberies netted less than $100. They often stole from small stores, just to get enough money for gas. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the thrill, the freedom, and their twisted version of romance. Their end was as violent as their lives. May 23, 1934. A police ambush in Louisiana. 6 officers with automatic weapons, 130 bullets. In less than 20 seconds, America's most famous outlaw couple was gone. Bonnie was 23. Clyde was 25. Their bullet-riddled car became a tourist attraction. Think about this. They knew they'd die young. Bonnie even wrote poems about it. But they chose this life, of violence and freedom, over a quiet life of poverty. Was it worth it? Living fast and dying young, becoming legends, but ending up riddled with bullets on a Louisiana road. And speaking of drug lords, our next story is about the man they call El Chapo, who took the drug trade into the 21st century with submarines, tunnels, and some of the most daring prison escapes ever. Meet Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the most innovative drug lord in history, a man who built the world's most sophisticated drug empire, complete with submarines, air fleet, and tunnels so complex they'd make engineering firms jealous. His nickname, El Chapo, it means shorty. But there was nothing small about his operation. Here's what's mind-blowing. He revolutionized drug trafficking, building super tunnels with electricity, rail systems, and air conditioning. His cartel had more planes than Mexico's largest airline. He even had a private zoo with lions, tigers, and panthers, living like a king while staying in the shadows. The escapes, though, that's where the legend began. In 2001, he escaped prison in a laundry cart. But that was amateur hour compared to 2015. His men dug a mile-long tunnel with ventilation, lighting, and a motorcycle on rails, right under the noses of prison guards. The tunnel alone cost $1 million. But check this out. El Chapo wasn't just about violence. He was a business genius. Created a FedEx-style delivery system for drugs, had submarines for ocean transport, even built an encrypted communication network. Forbes listed him among the world's most powerful people, right alongside presidents. The end came in 2016, after a massive manhunt. But here's the crazy part. They caught him because he was trying to make a movie about his life. His ego finally brought him down. Now, he's in America's Supermax prison, ADX Florence, the same one holding terrorists and cartel leaders. Think about this. A poor coffee farmer's son who built a $14 billion empire, now spending life in a concrete box. Was it worth it? Trading freedom for power, only to end up in the world's most secure prison. And speaking of legendary criminals, get ready for John Dillinger, the man who robbed banks like it was an art form and became public enemy #1. Meet John Dillinger, the man who turned bank robbery into a public spectacle during America's Great Depression. In just 1 year, 1933-34, he hit 24 banks, stole over $300,000, escaped jail twice, and became one of America's first celebrity criminals. People loved him. The banks, not so much. Here's what made him special. Dillinger wasn't just violent, he was theatrical. He'd jump over bank counters, crack jokes during robberies, even tell scared customers, "I'm not here for your money, just the banks." While people were losing homes to foreclosure, watching him humiliate banks became public entertainment. But check this out. His jailbreaks were legendary. He carved a fake gun from wood, blackened it with shoe polish, and walked right out of prison. Another time, he broke out, using a wooden gun, stole the sheriff's car, and crossed state lines, making it an FBI case. That's how he became their first public enemy #1. The technology he used was cutting edge: Thompson submachine guns, bulletproof vests, fast getaway cars. He'd steal police radio scanners, knew their codes, even had better weapons than law enforcement. Some banks had to close because they couldn't afford his robberies. The end came at Chicago's Biograph Theater, July 22, 1934. Betrayed by the lady in red, FBI agents were waiting. Dillinger reached for his gun. 3 bullets later, the legend was dead. But here's the weird part. People lined up to dip handkerchiefs in his blood. Thousands attended his funeral. Think about this. In just 13 months, he became an American legend. People saw him as a hero, even though he was a violent criminal. Why? Maybe during the Depression, watching banks lose money felt like justice. And speaking of con artists, get ready for Frank Abagnale Jr., the man who inspired Catch Me If You Can and pulled off some of the most incredible scams in history. Meet Frank Abagnale Jr., the greatest con artist in American history. By age 21, he had successfully posed as a pilot, doctor, lawyer, and college professor, cashed over $2.5 million in forged checks across 26 countries, and did it all before he could legally drink. Think you've seen the movie? The real story is even more incredible. Here's the wild part. He started at just 16. When his parents divorced, he ran away with $200. Within weeks, he'd figured out how to scam banks for thousands. His first big con, pretending to be a Pan Am pilot, flew over 1 million miles for free, stayed in hotels on the airline's tab, all without ever taking a flying lesson. But check this out. The doctor con was even crazier. He faked his way into supervising an entire hospital floor for almost a year without any medical training. How? By memorizing medical terms from TV shows. Then he became a lawyer, passed the bar exam, and worked for the Attorney General's office. The forgery skills, next level. He created his own checks so perfect, bank managers asked him to teach their staff how to spot fakes. The FBI called him the Skyway Man. He was so good, even when banks knew the checks were forged, they couldn't figure out how he did it. But here's the most fascinating part. After getting caught, serving time, the FBI hired him. That's right. The guy they chased for years became their top expert on fraud. Now he works with the FBI, trains agents, and has protected billions in bank money from people like his younger self. Think about this. A teenage runaway who outsmarted banks, airlines, and the FBI, turned his life of crime into a legitimate multi-million-dollar security business. Sometimes, the best person to catch a thief is another thief. And speaking of legendary outlaws, get ready for Jesse James, the Confederate soldier turned train robber who became America's most famous outlaw. Step back into the Wild West. Meet Jesse James, the Confederate soldier who became America's most notorious outlaw. After the Civil War, He didn't just rob banks and trains. He turned it into a political statement. With his gang of ex-Confederate soldiers, the James Younger Gang, they became heroes to many Southerners and nightmares to everyone else. Here's what's fascinating. Jesse and his brother Frank learned guerrilla warfare during the Civil War, then used those same tactics for robbery. Their first bank job? They rode in wearing KKK masks, stole $60,000, and left the banker dead. But they weren't just violent, they were media savvy. Jesse wrote letters to newspapers, defending their actions, painting themselves as modern-day Robin Hoods. The train robberies were their specialty. They'd use inside information, derail trains with stolen tools, then steal the safes in military precision. But check this out. They'd often let regular passengers keep their money, only took from the banks and railroad companies, making them folk heroes to poor farmers. Most incredible part, they operated for 15 years. Despite the biggest manhunts in history, the Pinkerton Detective Agency lost multiple agents trying to catch them, even had their own mother's arm blown off in one raid. But they couldn't catch Jesse. The end came from betrayal. Robert Ford, a gang member, shot Jesse in the back of the head for a $10,000 reward while Jesse was fixing a picture frame. April 3rd, 1882. The man who couldn't be caught, taken down by someone he trusted. Think about this. Was Jesse James a Southern hero, or just a violent criminal using politics as an excuse? His grave's inscription reads, "Murdered by a traitor," shows how many still saw him as a hero. And speaking of legendary gangsters, get ready for Lucky Luciano, the man who modernized organized crime and created the American Mafia as we know it. Meet Charles Lucky Luciano, the father of modern organized crime. This guy didn't just join the mob, he completely reinvented it, turned crime into a corporate empire, created the 5 families of New York, and established a criminal board of directors called the Commission, making the mob more powerful than it had ever been. Here's the crazy part. They called him Lucky because he survived a brutal attack. Thugs slit his throat, stabbed him multiple times, left him for dead. But he survived and came back stronger. That's when he decided to modernize the mob, get rid of the old mustache Pete's, and run crime like a business. But check this out. Luciano's real genius? He saw that ethnic rivalries were bad for business, created an organization where Italian, Jewish, even Irish gangs could work together. During Prohibition, he partnered with Meyer Lansky, built a bootlegging empire. That made modern corporations look small. His most brilliant move, the mob's first corporate structure. Different departments for different crimes. Gambling, protection, drugs, each with its own management. Just like a real company. Even set up rules for settling disputes. No more street wars. Everything decided by the Commission. The end wasn't what you'd expect. They got him on prostitution charges. But here's the wild part. During World War II, the Navy needed his help. He used his mob connections to protect New York's ports from Nazi sabotage, got his sentence commuted, but was deported to Italy. Think about this. A guy who started as a street thug ended up creating a criminal organization, so sophisticated it still exists today. Was he a genius? Or did he just create a monster that no one could control? And speaking of criminal geniuses, get ready for Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant, who turned dirty money into legitimate wealth. Meet Meyer Lansky, the man they called the mob's accountant. But he was much more than that. He was the financial genius who turned organized crime into big business. Never carried a gun, rarely made threats, but became one of the most powerful gangsters in history, all by using his brain instead of bullets. Here's what's incredible. Lansky understood something others didn't. The real power wasn't in violence, it was in money. He created offshore banking for criminals, invented money laundering techniques still used today, and built a gambling empire stretching from Cuba to Las Vegas, worth billions. But check this out. Despite running this massive criminal empire, the FBI could never prove he had any money. His famous quote, "I'm just a gambler." When he died, they only found $57,000 in his name, but experts say he hid over $300 million. That's $3 billion today, in secret accounts around the world. Most fascinating part? He was best friends with Lucky Luciano, a Jewish kid and an Italian immigrant, who together changed organized crime forever. During World War II, they both helped the US government. Lansky's casinos in Florida were used to catch Nazi spies. The government chased him for decades. But Lansky was always one step ahead. When they finally indicted him, he fled to Israel, claimed citizenship under the law of return. But Israel sent him back. Still, they couldn't convict him. The money was too well hidden. Think about this. He died in 1983, a modest retiree in Miami Beach. The FBI still doesn't know where most of his money went. Was he the greatest financial criminal ever? Or just the one who never got caught? And now, for our final story, get ready for Charles Ponzi, the man who invented the scheme that bears his name and fooled an entire city into making him rich. Meet Charles Ponzi, the man who became so famous for scamming people, they named a type of fraud after him. In just 6 months in 1920, he convinced thousands of Bostonians to invest millions, promising them a 50% return in 45 days. Too good to be true. Absolutely. But he was so convincing, people literally lined up to give him money. Here's the scheme. Ponzi claimed he was buying postal coupons in Europe, selling them in the US for profit. The math seemed perfect, except he wasn't actually buying anything, just using new investors' money to pay the earlier ones, created the illusion of success, while pocketing millions. But check this out. At his peak, he was making $250,000 a day. That's $3 million today. Had 6 clerks just to count cash. People mortgaged their homes, withdrew life savings. Even local banks invested, all believing in his guaranteed profits. He went from rags to riches in just months. The fascinating part, he lived like a king, bought a mansion, fine clothes, even his own company. When people got suspicious, he'd pull out rolls of cash, pay investors on the spot, making others trust him even more. Classic confidence trick. The collapse was spectacular. A newspaper investigation exposed him. Within days, thousands demanded their money back. The scheme fell apart. Total losses, about $20 million, nearly $250 million today. He spent 14 years in prison, got deported to Italy, died broke in a charity hospital. Think about this. A guy who barely spoke English managed to fool an entire city, created a scam so famous, we still talk about it today. The scary part? People are still falling for the same trick, just with different packaging. And that's our list of history's most notorious criminals. From gangsters to con men, each changed crime forever. Makes you wonder, are today's criminals studying their techniques or creating new ones we haven't seen yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.